Welcome to this explainer. Okay, if you've ever just sat there staring at a blinking cursor, feeling the crushing weight of a looming deadline, and then somehow found yourself reorganizing your spice rack instead of actually working, yeah, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're decoding procrastination. And look, if you've been carrying around all this guilt, constantly telling yourself you just need to try harder or be more disciplined, well, get ready, because we're about to experience a total paradigm shift together. Okay, let's dive into this. So, what if your procrastination isn't laziness at all, but a survival instinct? I know, it sounds totally counterintuitive, right? But what if that hidden shame you feel when you avoid a task is completely misplaced? What if your brain is actually just trying to protect you? Because, believe it or not, it's true. Your brain literally perceives certain tasks as a threat to your well-being, and it reacts exactly how evolution built it to. Section 1. Laziness is a myth. Let's completely redefine what's happening when we avoid our work. You know, we constantly use these two words interchangeably, but they couldn't be more different. Actual laziness is incredibly rare. When you're genuinely lazy, you feel perfectly fine about not doing a task. You're chill, your nervous system is completely relaxed, and you just lack the motivation to care. But procrastination? That is a high arousal state. You care deeply about the outcome. You really want to get it done, but you feel terrible, guilty, and super anxious the entire time you're avoiding it. You aren't relaxing, you're literally suffering through it. And that brings us to a massive realization. Procrastination is an emotional regulation problem, not a time management failure. You really don't need a better planner, you need a different emotional approach. See, when a task triggers feelings of inadequacy, fear of failure, or just pure overwhelm, your brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, sounds the alarm. It literally treats that spreadsheet or essay like a wild predator. It hijacks your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical part of your brain, and demands that you escape that discomfort right this second. Section 2, Present Bias and the Brain. Here's the neurological tug-of-war happening inside our heads. Behavioral economists have a great name for this: present bias. Basically, it's our deeply wired tendency to settle for a smaller, immediate reward right now rather than waiting for a much larger future reward. In our day-to-day lives, this means our brain violently prioritizes short-term mood repair over our long-term goals. Scrolling through social media fixes our bad mood right now, whereas the satisfaction of a finished project, well, that's just way too far away to help us out in the moment. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this internal battle maps perfectly to different areas of our brain. You've got the medial prefrontal cortex, that's the adult in the room fighting for your long-term goals. But man, it is fighting a two-front war. On one side, the amygdala is screaming about the threat and the shame of potentially failing at the task. And on the other side, the ventral striatum is offering this quick, easy hit of dopamine if you just go watch a funny video instead. When shame gets triggered, the amygdala and the ventral striatum actually team up, completely overpowering your logical prefrontal cortex. Section 3, Acrasia and the gray veil. Let's shift to the ancient, deep, emotional roots of this behavior. The ancient Greeks actually had a specific word for this exact phenomenon: akrasia. It basically translates to weakness of will or acting against your own better judgment. Think about that for a second. The Greek poet Hesiod was writing about the dangers of putting off work thousands of years ago. Humanity has been struggling with this since the literal dawn of recorded history. So if you're sitting there thinking you're uniquely flawed or somehow broken, you aren't. It's just a fundamental part of the human condition. But look, sometimes procrastination crosses the line from a simple human quirk into something much, much heavier. Psychologist Andrew Solomon talks about the gray veil of depression. He notes that when people are deeply depressed, they don't feel like a gray veil has been put over them. Instead, they feel like the veil of happiness has been stripped away, and they're finally seeing the world for how cold and meaningless it truly is. This is a really powerful metaphor because it connects directly to that heavy, alienating feeling that sometimes accompanies severe chronic procrastination. The tasks don't just feel hard, they start to feel completely meaningless. And that brings us to this incredibly heavy existential quote from researcher Tim Pyle. Just let this breathe for a moment. Your indecision, your inaction, becomes your choice. Wow. Even when we choose not to act simply out of dread or fear, we are still making a profound active choice about how we spend the minutes, hours, and ultimately the years of our lives. By not acting, we're basically choosing the sidelines. Section 4, the 4 procrastination archetypes. Let's move on and see how this builds so you can identify exactly what drives your avoidance. Most of us tend to fall into one of these four archetypes. First, we have the shame-driven procrastinator. This one's rooted in imposter syndrome. You avoid the task because it feels like a literal test of your fundamental worth. Next up is the fear-driven procrastinator. This is when you're constantly catastrophizing about what might go wrong, so you just choose the safety of doing nothing at all. Then we have the overwhelm-driven procrastinator, whose executive function simply crashes under the weight of a complex task. They literally don't know where to start. And finally, the rebellion-driven procrastinator, who avoids tasks simply because someone else told them to do it, subconsciously resisting that control. So, which one of these sounds the most like you?
Section 5, Structured Procrastination and Productivity. What happens when we use a clever workaround?
Enter Stanford philosopher John Perry. He actually won an Ig Nobel Prize for this brilliant, counterintuitive concept called structured procrastination. Perry realized that procrastinators rarely do nothing. They just avoid the top item on their list. So, his strategy? Put a massive, scary, decoy task at the very top of your to-do list, something that feels super urgent but actually isn't. To avoid that terrifying top task, you'll accidentally find yourself feverishly completing all the other important tasks underneath it. You're literally harnessing the energy of avoidance to get real work done.
So, the crucial point here is that this clever trick doesn't work for absolutely everyone. Research actually shows a stark difference between two types of people. Active procrastinators intentionally delay tasks, they thrive under pressure, and they ultimately meet their deadlines. For them, structured procrastination is a total superpower. But for passive procrastinators who get paralyzed by anxiety and routinely miss deadlines, well, this strategy is a really dangerous trap. It just becomes an elaborate form of self-deception that keeps them stuck forever. To figure out if your structured procrastination is genuinely strategic or just pure self-sabotage, you need to run this 3-step avoidance audit. First, ask yourself, are there real, painful consequences if I miss the deadline on this avoided task? Second, have I been actively avoiding it for more than 2 weeks? And third, take a hard look at the things you're doing instead. Are they actual valuable work tasks or just comfort activities, like, cleaning your desk for the 5th time today? If you're just seeking comfort, the system is broken.
Section 6, Breaking the Shame Cycle. Let's move into some highly actionable solutions for when this becomes a trap. And this brilliantly illustrates the rabbit hole of the mind, the 7-stage shame spiral. It starts with a trigger, which immediately sparks a shame thought, something like, I should have done this already. Then your body reacts with a physical sensation, maybe a really tight chest. So you engage in an avoidance behavior, like grabbing your phone, which gives you temporary relief. But soon enough, guilt floods in. And finally, it leads to identity generalization, where you just tell yourself, I'm just a lazy person. The incredible secret here? If you can interrupt this spiral at literally any of these 7 stages, the entire cycle shatters. So how exactly do we interrupt it? We use these antidotes. And notice, harsher discipline is absolutely not on this list. First is self-kindness, treating yourself like a friend who's struggling. This creates the emotional safety you need to actually start. Second, common humanity, recognizing that millions of people are struggling with this right now. You aren't uniquely broken. Third is mindfulness, observing your shame without drowning in it. And finally, micro-commitments. Don't commit to writing the whole report, just commit to opening the document. Make the task so ridiculously small that your brain's threat detector doesn't even notice it.
Now, before we wrap up, I want you to consider that sometimes avoidance is actually wisdom. You really have to ask yourself, is putting this off protecting my genuine well-being, like maintaining a healthy boundary against burnout, or is it just protecting my ego from the possibility of shame and failure? Knowing the difference there is absolutely key to mastering your own psychology.
To close out this explainer, I want to leave you with a really poignant metaphor from researcher Tim Peichel. He recalls his middle school dance, standing on the sidelines for hours, completely terrified of crossing the gym floor, paralyzed by the fear of rejection. When he finally forced himself out there at the very end of the night, his only thought was, why did I wait so long to start? You guys, your tasks, your goals, your life, they are that dance. Existential hesitation will keep you glued to the wall forever if you let it. So I'll leave you with this. Are you going to keep waiting on the sidelines, or are you going to step onto the floor and dance?